The 27th of January, 1945, approximately 40 miles west of Kraków, German-occupied Poland. The Soviet army enters Auschwitz, the largest of the extermination centers and one of the most infamous camps of the Holocaust. It is estimated that a minimum of 1.3 million people were deported to Auschwitz between 1940 and 1945, and of these, at least 1.1 million were murdered. However, not all its prisoners died. In this Nazi factory of horror, the Soviet soldiers liberate more than 7,000 surviving inmates who are mostly ill and dying. The unspeakable conditions the liberators confront shed light on the full scope of Nazi horrors. One of the perpetrators of the criminal Nazi regime responsible for these atrocities is Elisabeth Lupka. Elisabeth Lupka was born on the 27th of October, 1902, in Klein-Damner, then part of the German Empire. In 1934, she got married, but the marriage was childless and soon ended in divorce. Lupka was 30 years old when Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party came into power in Germany in January 1933. Following his appointment, the Führer began laying the foundations of the Nazi state based on racist and authoritarian principles, and in less than 6 months, Germany was transformed from a democratic state into a one-party Nazi dictatorship. Racism, including racial anti-Semitism, was always an integral part of German National Socialism. The Nazis perceived all of human history as the history of a biologically determined struggle between races. In 1935, 2 years after the Nazis came to power, the German government decreed the Nuremberg race laws. These laws codified a supposedly biological definition of Jewishness. The Nazi leadership considered the so-called Jewish race to be not only the most inferior of races, but also the most dangerous, since the Nazis attributed to the Jews inherited talent to mobilize the inferior, but more numerous races against the so-called superior races in a titanic biological struggle. Having defined Jewishness, the Nazis implemented a policy aimed at the physical elimination of the European Jews during World War II. About 2 out of every 3 Jews living in Europe before the war were killed in the Holocaust. When World War II ended in 1945, 6 million European Jews were dead. More than 1 million of the victims were children. Most of those who survived resided in areas of Europe not occupied by Germany during the war. Eastern areas of the Soviet Union, Great Britain, Bulgaria, and neutral states like Spain, Portugal, Switzerland, and Sweden. Tens of thousands of Jews also survived in German-occupied Europe, mostly in hiding or as prisoners in concentration camps until liberation. The Germans and their collaborators were relentless in hunting down and killing Jews in areas of Europe that they controlled. By war's end, the number of female auxiliaries in the German armed forces approached 500,000, including some 3,700 women who served as guards in the Nazi camp system. One such guard was Elisabeth Lupka. In 1937, Lupka moved to Berlin to work in the aircraft industry. The Second World War began on the 1st of September 1939 when Germany invaded Poland. In 1942, Lupka left her menial job as a laborer and went to Ravensbrück concentration camp to undergo training as a camp guard. Ravensbrück, opened in May 1939, was the only major women's camp established by the Nazis. In total, some 132,000 women from all over Europe passed through the camp, including Poles, Russians, Jews, Gypsies, and others. Of that number, over 92,000 women perished. Ravensbrück camp was staffed both by SS men, who served as guards and administrators, and by 150 women who served as supervisors. These female supervisors were either SS volunteers or women who had taken the job for the good pay and working conditions. Ravensbrück also housed a training camp for female SS guards, who were taught by Dorothea Binz, the sadistically cruel German Nazi officer and supervisor, who instructed her trainees on how to handle the prisoners that they were going to supervise. These prisoners would have to work until they died, and the task of their supervisors, such as Elisabeth Lupka, was to get the maximum amount of work out of them whilst they were still alive. Ravensbrück thus also became a training center, or a school of violence, for about 3,500 female guards, who went on to serve either there or at other concentration camps. In March 1943, Lupka was assigned to the Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration camp, located in German-occupied Poland, where she worked as a block overseer. The Auschwitz complex differed from the other Nazi killing centers because it included a concentration camp and a labor camp, as well as large gas chambers and crematoria at Birkenau, constructed for the mass murder of European Jews. It is estimated that the SS and police deported at least 1.3 million people to the Auschwitz camp complex between 1940 and 1945. Of these deportees, approximately 1.1 million people were murdered. Jewish deportees arriving at Auschwitz-Birkenau immediately underwent selection. As part of their camp duties, this was normally performed by Auschwitz medical staff. The purpose of the selection was to identify persons who were unable to work. The SS considered such persons as useless eaters and therefore murdered them. When transports of Jews arrived at Birkenau, the camp medical personnel selected some of the able-bodied adults to perform forced labor in the concentration camp. Those not selected for labor, including children and older adults, were murdered in the gas chambers. All visibly pregnant women and mothers of babies and young children were sent to the gas chambers upon arrival. Josef Mengele rationalized this as follows: "When a Jewish child is born, or a woman comes to the camp with a child already, I don't know what to do with the child. I can't set the child free because there are no longer any Jews who live in freedom. I can't let the child stay in the camp because there are no facilities that would enable the child to develop normally. It would not be humanitarian to send a child to the ovens without permitting their mother to be there to witness the child's death. That is why I send the mother and child to the gas ovens together." Camp physicians at Auschwitz and other concentration camps also conducted periodic selections in the camp infirmaries and barracks. They conducted these selections in order to identify prisoners who were either injured or had become too ill or weak to work. Elisabeth Lupka also took part in selections of the female prisoners to be sent to the gas chambers. These selections occurred every week during general assemblies, when the female inmates had to strip naked, regardless of the weather. Lupka personally chose who was to stay and who was to be exterminated, and thus became the master of life and death of the Auschwitz prisoners. Whilst at Auschwitz-Birkenau, she had a reputation of a twisted sadist, famous for beating both females and children, often for no reason. Elisabeth Lupka was known for her cruelty, and she enjoyed torturing prisoners with a whip and then sending them to the gas chambers. In January 1945, prisoners as well as guards could hear the Red Army fighting the Germans only a few kilometers from Auschwitz. As a result, SS units began the final evacuation of prisoners from the Auschwitz camp complex, marching them on foot toward the interior of the German Reich. These forced evacuations came to be called death marches. 60,000 prisoners were ordered to march west from the Auschwitz camp system, and thousands had been killed in the camp in the days before these death marches began. Lupka stayed in the camp until its last evacuations in early January 1945, and accompanied a death march first to Loslau, located 63 kilometers west of Auschwitz, and later to Ravensbrück. SS guards shot anyone who fell behind or could not continue. Prisoners also suffered from the cold weather, starvation, and exposure on these marches. It is estimated that as many as 15,000 prisoners died during the evacuation marches from Auschwitz. On the 6th of June 1945, 1 month after the end of World War II in Europe, Lupka was arrested by Allied troops and sent to an internment camp. 2 years later, on the 6th of July 1948, after a long investigation, she appeared at the Kraków court for war crimes and faced charges related mainly to the maltreatment of prisoners and her involvement in selections of inmates to be sent to the gas chambers. Lupka was 46 years old when she was found guilty and executed on the 8th of January 1949. Her execution was performed at 7:05 a.m. in the Montelupich prison in Kraków by short drop hanging. This short drop method of hanging, in which the body does not fall from too great a height, resulted in a torturous death by strangulation, which lasted anywhere from 10 to 20 long minutes. Lupka's body was then taken to the medical school at the University of Kraków for use as an anatomical specimen by the medical students. There were no tears shed for Elisabeth Lupka. Thanks for watching the World History Channel. Be sure to like and subscribe, and click the bell notification icon so you don't miss our next episodes. We thank you, and we'll see you next time on the channel.